One of the things I've learned doing this for the past several years now is that the modernists can't keep their mouth shut. Eventually, they tell you what it is they're doing, and they do it with a smile on their face. They do it as if it's the most right and just thing, the thing that God wants them to do. Explained before, and if you're new, maybe you haven't heard this, but the most dangerous modernists are not the ones who don't believe anything. Yes, there are certainly some who have no faith at all, who don't believe in God. They're there because maybe they've got James Martin type tendencies, and the priesthood is a great way to cover their tracks and all that stuff. Although in the modern world, you'd think they wouldn't need to do that anymore. But there are others, much more dangerous. They're the true believers. They believe that God needs them to fix the church. They believe that the church, at some point in her history, went off the rails, became this rigid, clericalist, oppressive institution, and that God is so very lucky to have them to fix his mistakes. I say it that way because when you listen to them talk, that's how they say things. They clearly don't believe that God guides the church. And they believe it's their job to reform the church, that the magisterium has gotten things wrong. And so inevitably, they will let what they believe and what they've done slip. And we started seeing this here right after the conclave. And I'm going to remind you this. I should use this article yesterday. I'm going to use it again here briefly to set the stage. This came from La Nacion, an interview with Cardinal Blaise Cupich, May 11th, 2025. Cardinal Blaise Cupich reveals that Leo XIV won by far more than 89 votes. It was obvious to everyone. Now, what he's not saying here is about how obvious it was is there were those of us who thought that Francis was going to choose a successor and that he would communicate this in one way or another to the bishops. And the article I'm about to show you, there's a cardinal who says exactly that is exactly what happened. But let's listen to Cardinal Cupich first, because he's asked about if he knew Cardinal Prevost and how well he knew him. And here's what he said. He says, I've known him for about 6 years because he was appointed to the dicastery of bishops like me, and we worked together there, but even more closely in the last 2 years when he became prefect. So it's a relationship that has developed over the past 6 years. He's a tireless worker who in many ways has a vision for the church very similar to that of Pope Francis. And then he go down here and he says, it was also after talking about how wonderful, all the good qualifications that Cardinal Prevost had for being Pope, administrative skills, missionary skills, a lot of things that, yes, 100% agree. The resume is wonderful for Pope. He says, it was also very clear that we, meaning the College of Cardinals, wanted someone to continue the work of Pope Francis. There was no interest in moving away from that or going in another direction. There was a great appreciation for Pope Francis that we all brought to our conversations. There's one aspect of this he doesn't say. We did hear that apparently the cardinals had the only complaint they had about Francis was his personality, that he was mean, that he was not a nice person, that he didn't have the pastoral sensitivities that they were looking for. Now, when you look at Pope Leo XIV, I'm the first to tell you, I don't think you're going to ever hear him call people rigid indie-trists who eat human waste and other sorts of disgusting things that Francis said about his adversaries. Now, Cupich wasn't the only one. Cupich wasn't the only one to say these things. Mentioned this several times before that other cardinals have said the same thing, which is why it was odd to get this confirmation from a European outlet I don't often use just because I usually forget to, but it's from Roma Today, and the headline is Intra Conclave. Now, this is an oddly written article because it's written in a narrative way, as if you were reading a book that was telling you a story. But it's important here what they're saying. The author had a chance encounter with a cardinal from the College of Cardinals, a cardinal whom he never names. And the reason he never names him is because what the cardinal is about what you hear the cardinal say violates canon law. The cardinals are never supposed to talk about any specifics about the conclave, and this cardinal does give you specifics about the conclave. Strictly speaking, he's excommunicated now. Not that that stuff's ever enforced. Automatic excommunication is never enforced unless you are a traditionalist or a traditional friendly bishop. That's the only people who ever get excommunicated here. But let's just go over this. This is a bombshell. Rome still reverberated with the echoes of the celebrations for the inauguration of the first American pope. The warm weather had opened famous terraces where Roman nobility, Catholic, apostolic, and papal, vied to welcome the powerful of the day. Cardinals, princes of the Church of Rome, fresh from the labors of the conclave, were sought after and regular guests, always the center of attention of their hosts, never vulgar, tangible emblems of a silent, age-old power, and therefore accustomed to being unobtrusive. Their presence or absence alone was enough to elevate the reception. Like I said, this is written in a way like you're reading a book. The evening was warm and welcoming. From that terrace, Rome stretched out magnificently and imposingly, millennia old and restless, like a teenager. A saucy breeze did justice to a scorching day. The dinner had been informal and pleasant. Many of the guests had already returned home, bidding farewell to the hostess, who was full of compliments on the house, the food, and the company. She had been as impeccable as a medieval lady of the castle. He was sitting on a deck chair, his collar untucked, the crucifix in his shirt pocket, a glass in his hand, his legs crossed. The posture of complete relaxation. The week's exhaustion and the richness of the libations were taking their toll on his elderly but still athletic body. Pausing here, he's setting up this is the cardinal who spills the beans. He's implying that his guard was let down after a nice evening of socializing and dinner with some libations to help loosen him up a little bit. As he gazed at the immortal panorama of the imperial forums, a satisfied smile seemed to be creeping into his face. Now or never, I thought. I picked up my glass of cognac and approached him. Beautiful Rome, isn't it? I tried to break the ice, surprising him. Especially when he's sleeping, he replied quickly, almost as if he were ready for the question, his legendary quick wit. Your Eminence, what were you thinking? I insisted. I was relaxing. If I bother you, I'll leave, I tried to say. No, stay, he said with genuine good nature. So I took the courage and pulled up a chair. I leaned back and crossed my legs too. I sipped a glass of that cognac and tried to steer her away. Great company tonight, truly a very pleasant evening. Yes, he replied, without taking his eyes off the Roman Senate. There's nothing to say, I tried to insist. The old guard always has its charm. The people here tonight represent that old ruling class, which spoke complete Italian and didn't limit themselves to Facebook profiles. The world is changing, and I don't know if it's changing for the better. My dearest son, he replied, the world is changing, not just the ruling class, and it never changes for better or worse, it simply changes. Well, from this point of view, the Church of Rome doesn't need to take lessons from anyone. It has a capacity for reading and responding to new times that no human structure has ever had. Objectively true. After all, it has 2,000 years of experience, I concluded, smiling. Some say it's the Holy Spirit, he said. Like in the conclave? True, Your Eminence? I tried to catch him off guard. He jumped. He was settling into a banal, easily understood discussion. He hadn't expected this digression. Following the jolt, he stiffened and fixed me with a wary gaze for the first time. Son, you're not trying to get me excommunicated, are you? You know I can't talk about the conclave, he scoffed, smiling. Come on, Your Eminence, only lay people risk excommunication since the Supreme Pontifical Electio, I said, spreading my arms and pulling back my chin with a smile. He laughed heartily and slumped back in his chair. I risked everything and pressed him. Your Eminence, how did it go? Is it true that Parolin withdrew his candidacy? Is it true that the College of Cardinals wanted to identify a more moderate profile for Bergoglio? My dear son, he said to me, you just don't understand. Prevost was Bergoglio's only candidate. Even shortly before he died, that old Argentine stubborn man had called all the cardinals he could trust and told them, please remember, after me, it's the American's turn, a missionary, an Augustinian. He will be the best for the universal church. So why those votes for Parolin? I tried to contradict him. On the first ballot, Prevost was already ahead of everyone, far ahead of everyone. The black smoke on the evening of May 7th arrived so late because that holy man, Monsignor Cantamalesa, pausing here, he's referring to Raniero Cantalamessa, who is not somebody you want preaching to your household, we'll say. The man is a modernist's modernist. He says, had overindulged in his spiritual exercises. Prevost, as competitors, had to his left, led by hyper-Bergoglians, those I call Bergoglians despite Bergoglio and beyond Bergoglio, namely Parolin, and to his right, the traditionalists, led by Robert Serra, or Serra, supported by Cardinal Erdo. But why Prevost, I asked? Because Bergoglio was very clear that after his pushback, a normalizer was needed, someone who could reassure the Curia, even though he wasn't a member of the Curia, someone who could reassure the progressives, even though he wasn't a traditionalist, and finally, someone who could reassure the traditionalists, because he was seen as a moderate. This last thing was what most worried the old pope, meaning Francis. He had a clear feeling that at a certain point in his pontificate, a schism had actually come close. In short, someone was needed to unite, even a little gray if you like, but after the fireworks, a little silence is good. Look, he said, bringing his face closer to mine, I'll confess something to you. Even the name, on that too, I think the Argentine Pampas had their say. They needed the name of a pope of tradition, but also the first pope who opened the church to the modern world, the one of Rerum Novarum. Now we're going to pause here. What is Rerum Novarum, if you're not familiar? Rerum Novarum is the papal encyclical by Pope Leo XIII. It is often credited as having launched the tradition of Catholic social teaching. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on Catholic social teaching as an answer to the sort of sustainable development, environmental questions of our day. Laudato Si was unfortunately, something I had to focus on heavily there in that document. But Rerum Novarum is said to have kicked off the Catholic social teaching tradition. There are documents that you would say that I argue came from that were part of the Catholic social teaching tradition before Rerum Novarum. Some written by Leo XIII himself, others written by Pope Gregory XVI and others, and Pius IX before Leo. But Rerum Novarum was like an injunction point. It firmly planted the church as having the authority to comment on economics and politics and things in a changing world, that it was fully equipped to deal with capitalism versus socialism, the Industrial Revolution, the rise of Marxism, all these things. It was fully equipped to not only talk about these things, but to correct errors and to offer an alternative way forward. Rerum Novarum critiqued the excesses of late 19th century capitalism, the robber baron stuff, the Gilded Age, all those errors. But his critiques of those were pretty mild by comparison to the critiques of socialism. And Rerum Novarum was such an important encyclical that 40 years later, Pius XI wrote an encyclical called Quadragesimo Anno, after 40 years or 40 years later, which was just updating Rerum Novarum for the 1930s. And then Paul VI wrote one to do this similar kind of thing, and John Paul II wrote one celebrating the 80th anniversary of Rerum Novarum. To give you an idea of how, or a century actually, for Rerum Novarum with John Paul II. And a lot of Catholic social teaching was based on Rerum Novarum, even if it never cited it. Unfortunately, it's also been misconstrued, misused, and badly misused, especially after Vatican II. I can talk for hours about Catholic social teaching if I wanted to. And what they're right to say is that Leo XIII did bring the church into, quote, the modern world by addressing modern problems. The problem is they misuse him. That is the clear path that they take with him. And it's unfortunate. It really is, because Leo XIII is probably my favorite of the pre-conciliar popes, of the modern pre-Vatican II popes. If you want to know a truly Marian pope, I have on this channel all 12 of his encyclical letters on the Rosary. Leo XIII was prolific. He wrote 88 encyclicals and motu proprios and apostolic constitutions and things. And I've got like half of them here. And a quarter of what I've got here for you from him is on the rosary. But they invoke him, and they do that on purpose. Leo the 13th is beloved by virtually everybody who knows anything about the history of the modern history of the church. So the interviewer continues saying, "Who broke the deadlock?" I asked with intrusive curiosity, to which the cardinal responds, "You don't understand. There was never an impasse. The other votes were only a few votes short." Only then, to put an end to the matter immediately, did Bergoglio's most trusted man, Cardinal Jean-Claude Hollerich, coincidentally the general rapporteur of the synod, Bergoglio's brainchild, take action. Hollerich set things straight, and Parolin at that point declared his unwillingness to be elected. So it was a landslide, 107 votes. I believe poor Erdo, this is going to be clearly a typo from like autocorrect or something. Erdo, the conservative cardinal, who was thought to be a front runner against, well, for the more traditional side. I believe poor Erdo even asked not to be voted for again, but the hardline traditionalists had figured out the game and wanted to represent their dissent. In short, only those who made a mistake didn't vote for Prevost. And so he burst into a loud, liberating, and therefore also a little raucous laugh. Your position, Your Eminence, how are you positioned? I've been on Prevost's side since the beginning. I know him and I share Bergoglio's logic. He's the best choice, certainly less flashy, but we need someone who can consolidate Francis's shoulders, meaning the things he's done to the church. We need a Paul VI who can reassure and confirm. And that's interesting, though. If you want any sign of hope from this, take it there. I'm not a fan of Paul VI. I've never hidden that I'm shocked that they canonized him because of the things he did to the church. But if they think he's a Paul VI, I'm going to remind you that Paul VI destroyed all of his political capital, basically as Pope, when he issued Humanae Vitae, and when he opposed the total consolidation of power in the College of Bishops, when he did that opposing collegiality. Now, again, I'm not a fan of Paul VI, but there may be some slight sign of hope here if this is where if this is what they were hoping for. Prevost is a worthy person, very serious, available, a missionary at heart. And I don't think that anybody can really disagree that he's very serious, that he's made himself available so far and has a missionary heart. I have only one doubt about his physical conditions. The Pope's workload is terrible, but you'll see he'll be able to organize himself around this too. Regarding John the 23rd, a distinguished theologian, Hannah Arendt wrote of him, a Christian on the throne of Peter. I think this expression could also be applied to Francis, while for Leo one could say a priest on the throne of Peter. In short, that's what's needed in a historical period like this. Well, of course, also as a geopolitical choice. Exactly, replies the cardinal. Think about the relationship between an American and Trump. They were all ready to cry third world scandal with the election of an Asian, or worse, an African. The Argentine Jesuit had thought of that too and fooled them. Bergoglio was a genius. Yes, but now, if I understand correctly, everything is on ice. The whole dynamic set in motion by the Bergoglian revolution has ground to a halt, I objected. And here's the next bombshell. Quite the opposite. Bergoglio had realized he had reached the breaking point. In fact, he didn't push any further on priestly celibacy, female priesthood, and other issues that had been the subject of a doctrinal controversy for centuries. Now it's a matter of consolidating the space he occupied, meaning making everything he's done permanent. Until the next pontiff, who will likely be an African, it will take a further, decisive, final step forward. You'll see that after Leo, there will be a John the 24th, he says, smiling, and then the synod. That will be the spirit of Bergoglio that will remain in the church to watch over her. The synod is itself the spirit. Now you have to ask, when they talk about the spirit, listening to the spirit, this is what they're talking about, the spirit of Bergoglio, the spirit of Francis. I must say that this conversation presents a somewhat, shall we say, subdued profile of Prevost, I added. It's quite the opposite. The cardinal became agitated. He, Prevost, has the historic, almost mystical task of keeping the Church of Christ united. Ut unum sint non prevebunt. Leo must represent the continuity of the mission. The church's mission functions if it's in continuity with itself. cannot depend on the characteristics of the Pope at hand. We must carry forward the mission assigned to us by Jesus, corresponding in our actions to a divine plan. Remember how I started this. True believers. They truly believe it is the will of God to impose synodality on the church, to reform the church, to liberate it from its rigid clericalist past. They truly believe that Vatican II was the saving grace of the church and that they're doing the final job of implementing it. Believe them when they tell you this. Don't believe they don't believe anything. You underestimate them. The most dangerous people out there are zealots, and they are absolute zealots for what they are doing to the church. Try to ease the tension. So on a mission from God, like the Blues Brothers, also from Chicago, I said, laughing. Exactly, he concluded, laughing and relaxing back into the lounge chair. And it goes on. I'll have a link to this in the show notes at returntotradition.org or at the new Anthony Stine subreddit. If you're interested, read it for yourself. You'll need an extension to translate it like I have on my browser, but you'll need you must read though for yourself if you are so interested. Many people suggested that Francis was going to have somebody in mind ahead of time. Nobody thought it would be Prevost because, well, there were a couple people who thought that. As I pointed out yesterday, there was a nun who told a Vatican journalist that they expected Cardinal Prevost to be the next pope. And then that journalist sought that nun out afterwards, and she was like, I don't know where that came from. That's where we are, folks. I'm going to lighten this up a little bit with a couple light stories to change things up a little bit. You might have heard that that one of the highest profile Catholics in the United States just got his television show canceled. And that would be Stephen Colbert. Not normally something I talk about on this channel, but he managed to destroy a late night television show that was part of television history. And he did it because most late night shows thrive on poking at politics, making fun of both Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives, kind of even-handedly. If there's a slight imbalance, it's usually to the left, but it's not so much that those who don't agree with it can't watch the show. Well, Colbert tossed that playbook out entirely. His show became a propaganda outlet. And like a good propaganda outlet, they usually have each other's back, which is why American Magazine published this amazing piece, a requiem for Stephen Colbert, the most subversive Catholic voice in late night TV. Well, okay, I'll grant him that, not only because, one, he's subverting everything good and decent, but also he's the only Catholic voice, as far as I know, in late night TV. So I'll grant him that title, because it's literally no competition. But American Magazine, this article spends a lot of time talking about the state of late night television and how things have changed and how Colbert is a ratings problem, how he's lost $40 million a season, apparently, every year that show's been on the air. $40 million. And even addressing some of the ideas that it was politics, that Trump somehow put pressure on CBS to get him canceled. An absolutely absurd idea. We'll go down here. We can find where it is. There we go. This is the part where it gets interesting. Quote, with all that said, the real tragedy of Colbert's imminent departure is the loss of a highly visible, intelligent, and articulate voice of dissent. I want to address that claim head on here. Stephen Colbert was the voice of the system, meant to get Catholics and, center-left liberals to go along with the system against the outsider politics that have suddenly gained a foothold. Colbert wasn't the voice of dissent. He was a voice upholding the system. And he did it at the small price of his soul, from the looks of it. He advocated for all sorts of things publicly that were against the teachings of the church, and he did so without shame, without remorse. Truly remarkable. And it's sad, too, because I remember when he was on The Daily Show. Yeah, he was obviously making fun of conservatives, but at least he was funny once in a while doing it. He became a voice for the system when he got that late night show. And then there was nothing funny about it. And more specifically, one who proudly wears his Catholic faith on his sleeve. Colbert has shown time and again and not just in his on-air interactions with Pastor Jimmy Martin F.J., including on America's New The Spiritual Life podcast, that he is well-versed in the church's social and ethical doctrines. Indeed, Colbert's humor, particularly in relation to its criticism of the current administration, has been grounded in the church's teachings on human dignity, the common good, and concern for the poor and marginalized. However funny you may think Colbert is or is not, you cannot deny the prioritization his humor gives to matters of real social consequence. This story is not over. The time he has remaining at the Late Show is the same amount that it takes for a human being to gestate. A lot can happen in 9 months, and I expect that a lot will. For the moment, I am left with the feeling that something is not quite right. That though late night's time may be passing, the events surrounding the cancellation of the Late Show last week, the erasure of an opposition voice just doesn't seem right. Sorry, but television operates on ratings. And his show lost $40 million a year. That's a lot of money. It just is. You can't keep doing that. And Paramount, anybody who follows entertainment business at all knows that Paramount is broke. It's been sold and resold several times in the last 20 years for a lot of reasons. And the current owners seem to be trying to right the ship. And the problem is they got rid of what would be considered like a cultural institution by getting rid of that show entirely. Not just getting rid of Colbert, but the entire program. But yes, it's as Kay says, who the heck is saying this? It's insane. Yes, it is insane. It's absolutely insane. Not as insane as this other story, though. Get ready for more propaganda. And this is the kind of propaganda that Catholics of all stripes should be wary of. The system is going to be telling you soon, it seems, that visitors from far off worlds are coming to Earth, and probably a threat. Probably is what they're going to say. That they're coming here and we must unite around some central authority and give all of our money and everything so that they can impose things on us for our own safety. That kind of rhetoric. We've been waiting for this for a long time. And now it seems that the powers that should not be are getting ready to make their next play. I'm going to show you this utterly amazing story. And it came from Newsweek. Headline, Harvard physicist claims new interstellar comet is an alien probe. Now that's an amazing story, isn't it? That there's a comet coming, and it's not behaving in ways that comets usually do, according to the scientist. And so the only other thing it could be is Voyager, basically, or one of those Mars rovers that we send, except from some other civilization, from another species, some far-flung corner of the universe. Now, if you've ever listened to like pretty hard-line physicists about this kind of thing, there's some actual like logistics problems with sending probes from one corner of the universe to the other. But maybe if we're talking about an advanced enough species, they've worked that issue out. And he's saying the word probe, but you don't have to have much of an imagination or nefarious purposes to say, well, it's actually not a probe. It's a craft with inhabitants. And it's a threat. So you must surrender all your freedoms. That is essentially a crisis to manufacture for political purposes. So get ready for this story. I expect this isn't the only time you're going to hear about this in the coming weeks or months. From the Newsweek article, as mainstream of a mainstream outlet as it gets. Quote, an unexpected visitor to our solar system spotted earlier this month might be a piece of alien technology. That is according to one professor from Harvard University. 31/Atlas, which is only the third known interstellar object ever recorded, was detected on July 1st by NASA's Atlas telescope in Chile. Despite being officially classified as a comet, theoretical physicist Professor Avi Loeboff, Harvard University, has argued that the object could have been sent by an alien civilization. Loeb explained that the object's trajectory, size, and behavior suggest it could be something far more advanced than a natural occurrence. It could instead be some form of alien craft or probe. The retrograde orbital plane of 31 Atlas around the Sun lies within 5 degrees of that of Earth. The likelihood for that coincidence out of all random orientations is 0.2%, Loeb told Newsweek. Despite this, other scientists are skeptical of Loeb's claims. Richard Mosel, head of planetary defense at the European Space Agency, told Newsweek there have been no signs pointing to non-natural origins of 31 Atlas in the available observations. I'm going to point out something. The European Space Agency has a planetary defense program. Okay. These are not the only anomalies that set 31 Atlas apart from typical comets. In addition to its retrograde orbit, Loeb said that the brightness of 31 Atlas implies an object that is around 20 kilometers in diameter, which he explains is too large for an interstellar asteroid. It might have targeted the inner solar system as expected from alien technology, he added. 31 Atlas is expected to pass unusually close to Venus, Mars, and Jupiter this fall. An alignment Loeb calculates as having a probability of just 0.005% if the arrival time were random. The comet is expected to reach its closest point to the Sun on October 29th, when it will be hidden from Earth's view, a detail Loeb finds suspicious. This could be intentional to avoid detailed observations from Earth-based telescopes, he added. The object also lacks typical cometary features. No special features of cometary gas are found in spectroscopic observations of 31 Atlas, he said. Unlike Loeb, the gentleman from the European Space Agency believes that the most likely explanation for the object is natural origin, likely originating from an orbit around a star somewhere in our galaxy. All observations are in agreement with basic assumptions about space-weathered natural object, which so far weak cometary activity. It's not the first time Loeb has shared an extraterrestrial theory for a space object. In 2022, he theorized that the mysterious cosmic object known as Oumuamua may be technology from an alien civilization. While emphasizing this remains a hypothesis, Loeb argues the possibility deserves serious attention. The consequences, should the hypothesis turn out to be correct, could potentially be dire for humanity. We better be ready for both options and check whether all interstellar objects are rocks. In the meantime, work is being done to collect as much data as possible about objects like 31 Atlas. So yes, this is the Hans Zarkov of our time, if you know that reference. Get ready for more of this. There has been a lot of, spacecraft, alien craft talk in the media in the last few years, with disclosure, as they call it, allegedly coming. When that happens, I don't think it's an if, I think it's a when, be prepared for propaganda unlike anything you've ever seen. We're talking about bad people, and the chances of there being another civilization out there who can reach us are pretty small. And the chances of there being another species out there with consciousness is, if you take a biblical worldview, probably zero. Unless you believe in the demons thesis, which I tend to. Now, I'm curious what you have to say about this all, so let me know in the comments. Are you surprised by the Leo story? I'm not. I saw that coming a mile away. Are you surprised at all by this story? The story about a comet that is behaving unlike the way comets usually do, heading towards a place where it won't be able to be observed easily by humans, and being potentially from outside the solar system, or so our totally trustworthy scientists tell us. Well, let me know in the comments what you think about this, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It absolutely does help. Sharing this on social media helps a lot too. Please pray for the church and pray for the Pope. I'm not trying to whip you up against him. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.